The nurse grabbed my arm before I could reach his room. Her face was calm, but her voice had that sharp, careful tone people use when they know they're about to ruin someone's life. "Are you family?" "I'm his wife," I said, still shaking from the police call, still hearing the words car accident and severe bleeding over and over in my head. My slippers were soaked from the rain outside. I had left the front door open when I ran out of the house. She looked down at the tablet in her hand, then back at me. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "It says his spouse has already been notified. Eva Morales." For a second, the hallway tilted. Machines beeped behind the double doors. A baby was crying somewhere down the hall. Somebody laughed at the nurse's station, but all I could hear was that name. Eva Morales. Not mine. Not Nora Reed. Not the name I had signed on tax forms, holiday cards, and the stupid little chalkboard in our kitchen that said, "The Reeds, blessed and busy." I stared at her like she had misread the screen. Then Caleb's phone lit up in the plastic evidence bag on the counter beside her. A message flashed across it. "Is Mateo asleep or still waiting for you?" And just like that, every lie in my marriage opened its eyes. I wish I could tell you I turned cold in that moment. I wish I became one of those women in stories who immediately knows what to do, what to say, how to survive betrayal without shaking. But I didn't. I just stood there with my mouth open and my heart splitting down the middle, trying to make a stranger's name fit into the shape of my husband. But that wasn't the worst part. When they finally let me see Caleb, he looked fragile enough to fool God. His forehead was stitched, his left arm was in a cast, and his lip was swollen. The sight of him should have broken me. 3 years earlier, it would have. 3 years earlier, I would have sat beside his bed, kissed his hand, and thanked heaven for sparing him. Instead, I stood at the foot of that bed and asked the only question that mattered. "Who is Ava?" His eyes opened wide for half a second. Just half a second. Then he did what liars do best. He arranged his face. "Nora," he whispered, like I was the problem and he was the injured one. "Not now." That was Caleb's talent. He could turn smoke into fog, fog into confusion, and confusion into guilt. By the time we met, I was exactly the kind of woman a man like him could build a trap around. I was 32, tired, and hungry for a home that felt permanent. I had grown up bouncing between foster houses until I landed with Mrs. Bennett, a widow who never had children and treated me like something delicate that life had almost broken. When she died, she left me the little blue house she owned on Maple Street and a note that said, "You have spent enough of your life feeling temporary." I met Caleb 6 months later at the grocery store of all places. I was standing in the flower aisle holding a bunch of wilted lilies and crying because Mrs. Bennett used to love fresh flowers on Sundays, and suddenly I realized nobody would ever ask me again if I remembered to trim the stems. Caleb came over, made some gentle joke about the flowers looking as tired as he felt, and somehow stayed beside me until I laughed. He didn't come on too strong. That would have scared me. He came on soft. He remembered little things. He asked real questions. He listened when I talked about grief instead of trying to fix it. When he looked at me, I felt chosen in a way I had never felt before. Safe. Seen. Wanted. And that was the first reason I ignored the cracks. Caleb said he worked in property restoration. The job explained everything. The late nights. The emergency calls. The weekends away. The dust on his boots, the strange neighborhoods, the stress. He said houses told stories when they were broken, and he loved bringing them back. I thought that made him kind. Now I know broken things were simply easier for him to enter. By the time we got married, I had already started letting him handle things I should have kept in my own hands. Bills, insurance, repairs on the house. Refinance paperwork he said would free up room so we could remodel the kitchen and maybe turn the spare room into a nursery someday. He made the future sound so normal, so easy. And if you've spent your whole life afraid of losing what little love you get, normal can feel like a miracle. I didn't know what was coming next. In that hospital room, he kept trying to look tired enough to avoid the truth. Eva is my ex, he said finally, his voice dry and weak. The paperwork must be old. I never updated the emergency stuff. I didn't answer. She has a son, he added quickly. Mateo, I help them sometimes. His dad left. It's complicated. Complicated, that word should be printed on every liar's forehead. It means I need more time to build a better lie. I stepped closer to the bed. Why did her message say he was waiting for you? He swallowed. He gets attached. I've helped them for years. Why is she listed as your spouse? He closed his eyes like I was exhausting him. Nora, please. I almost died. There it was. The pivot. Make me cruel for asking. Make me feel heartless for noticing. Make his wound bigger than mine, so I stopped talking and watched him instead. That's the thing about betrayal. Once the illusion cracks, your eyes learn fast. I saw the fear he hid when the doctor mentioned paperwork. I saw the relief when I backed off. I saw his gaze flick toward the evidence bag that held his phone. Not toward me. Not toward my face. Toward the phone. What I saw next shocked me even more. The next morning, I went back to the hospital with clean clothes for him. A nurse at the front desk smiled politely and asked, "Do you want the discharge note sent to the Maple Street address or Willow Lane?" I felt every hair rise on my arms. "I'm sorry?" I asked. She checked the screen. "Sorry, I thought both addresses were confirmed. No problem. Maple Street was our house. Willow Lane meant nothing to me." I said thank you, took the clothes, and walked all the way back to my car before I let myself breathe. Then I sat there gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers went numb. If I confronted him too early, he'd clean up the trail. If I did nothing, I'd keep living inside a lie. So for the first time in my marriage, I didn't ask him for the truth. I went looking for it. Willow Lane was 14 minutes from the hospital. A neat little duplex on the edge of a quiet neighborhood, the kind with kids' bikes tipped over in driveways and wind chimes hanging on porches. I parked 2 houses down and told myself there was probably an explanation. Maybe storage. Maybe a friend. Maybe a tenant. Maybe anything that would let me go home and still be the woman I had been yesterday. Then Caleb's truck pulled into the driveway. He wasn't supposed to be discharged until the next day. He got out slowly, favoring his side, carrying a plastic grocery bag in one hand. The front door flew open before he could knock. A little boy, maybe 5 years old, launched himself at Caleb's waist and yelled, "Daddy!" The word went through me like glass. I watched Caleb bend one arm around the boy, watched a dark-haired woman appear in the doorway, watched her take the bag from his hand with the kind of tired intimacy that only exists when 2 people have done ordinary life together for a long time. Not passion, not drama, habit. She smiled at him. He stepped inside, and then everything changed. I don't remember getting out of the car. I only remember the sound of my own fist hitting that door harder than I meant it to. The woman opened it with annoyance already on her face, but the second she saw me, something in her expression shifted. She looked from me to the street, then behind her, like some part of her already understood this moment had been delayed, not avoided. "Yes?" she asked. I held up my phone. On the screen was a picture from our wedding day. Me in cream lace. Caleb in gray, his hand on my waist. My smile so open it hurt to look at. "I'm Nora," I said. "I'm Caleb's wife." The color drained out of her face. Behind her, I heard Caleb chorus under his breath. For one wild second, I thought she might slam the door on me. Instead, she opened it wider and said, "No. I'm Caleb's wife." We stood there staring at each other like 2 women who had just been shoved into the same nightmare from opposite ends. Caleb came into the hallway with the little boy tucked behind him. "Eva, don't what?" she snapped. "Let your other wife in?" I will never forget the sound of that sentence. Not because it was loud, because it was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that means the pain is so deep it's already past screaming. The little boy started crying. Caleb turned, told him to go to his room, then looked at me with that same manipulative softness that had once melted every wall I had. "Nora, let me explain." "No," Eva said. "You explained to both of us." But he didn't. Not really. He did what men like him always do when the truth finally corners them. He tried to divide us before we could compare notes, told Eva I was unstable, told me Eva was obsessed, told us both we misunderstood, claimed he had been trying to leave one relationship before the other got serious, claimed paperwork was delayed, claimed grief, stress, timing, pressure, claimed anything that bought him even 30 more seconds. But then Eva went into her bedroom and came back with a framed marriage certificate dated 3 years before mine, and then I showed her mine. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew one thing. At least one of those documents was a lie. Eva and I sat at her kitchen table while Caleb paced in the living room pretending the world hadn't just split open. Mateo had finally fallen asleep clutching a stuffed dinosaur. The house smelled like rice and detergent and the sweet soap children use. Ordinary smells, real life. The kind I had imagined Caleb only had with me. Eva had married him in a courthouse ceremony 4 years earlier. She showed me photos. A cheap bouquet, a borrowed dress, Caleb looking exactly the way he looked in my wedding photos, warm, steady, believable. She had met him when she was pregnant and scared after her boyfriend died in a warehouse accident. Caleb had stepped in, she said, took care of things, promised Mateo would never feel fatherless. By the time the baby was born, Caleb was already living with them half the week. I laughed when she said half the week. Not because it was funny, because that was the same half of the week he told me he spent at out-of-town job sites. But that wasn't the part that broke me. Eva opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of utility bills, insurance statements, tax envelopes, all addressed to Caleb Reed at Willow Lane. Then she slid a ring box across the table. Inside was a simple gold band I had never seen before, engraved with C&E, always. He had not built one fake life badly. He had built 2 real-looking lives at the same time. When I got up to leave, Caleb followed me outside. He looked injured, desperate, almost convincing. "Nora, please. I was going to tell you." "When?" I asked. "After which anniversary?" He ran a hand through his hair and winced dramatically from his stitches. It got out of control. "No," I said. "You kept it under control perfectly. That's what makes this evil." His face changed then. Just for a second, the softness dropped. I saw annoyance, not shame, not remorse. Not remorse. Annoyance that I had become difficult. Then the mask slipped back on and he said my name in that low pleading voice that used to work on me. I got into my car and drove home without crying. That scared me more than anything. My pain had gone past tears and into something sharp and clean. The next day, I called the county clerk's office to verify my marriage certificate. The woman on the phone was kind, which made it worse. She searched 3 times. My stomach turned while I listened to keys tapping. Finally, she said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, I'm not finding that record number." I read it again. Slower. Nothing. Then I read Ava's record number. That one came up instantly. My marriage, the thing I had built my whole future around, did not legally exist. What I felt in that moment was bigger than heartbreak. Heartbreak says you lost love. This was the realization that love had never even been invited into the room. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't even a mistake. I was a target. I went through every drawer in my house that afternoon, every file folder, every kitchen binder, every important papers box Caleb had organized for us because numbers stressed me out. My hands were shaking so badly I ripped an envelope in half. That's when I found the refinance packet. My signature was on it. Or something close enough to mine to fool a tired bank clerk. Caleb's name had been added to the house deed 8 months earlier. There was also a home equity loan I had never seen, taken out against the Maple Street house for $74,000. I sat on the floor with those papers spread around me like wreckage. Mrs. Bennett's house. The only real inheritance I had ever had. The only place I had ever truly belonged. He had put his hands inside that too. And then everything got worse. Eva came over after dark. It was our first time alone without Caleb nearby, and for a minute we just stood in my kitchen looking at each other like mirrors from different years. She was beautiful in a tired, real way. Hair tied up, circles under her eyes, one chipped thumbnail. Not some glamorous rival. Not a villain. Just another woman who had believed a man with a patient voice and a talent for entering broken places. He took out cards in my name, she said quietly. 3 that I know of. Maxed them all. I thought it was medical stuff for Mateo, then business debt, then temporary cash flow. Every month there was another reason. I showed her the loan papers. She covered her mouth with one hand and whispered, "Oh my God." We spent hours comparing stories, same lines, same promises, same fake vulnerability. He told both of us he had been abandoned by a cruel mother. He told both of us he hated lies because his father cheated. He told both of us we were the first place he had ever felt peace. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so violating. After every discovery, another memory turned rotten. The first big break came from something small. A receipt in the pocket of one of Caleb's work jackets. Storage unit paid in cash, current month. Unit 214. I held that tiny square of paper between my fingers and felt the entire air shift. Why would he need storage? I asked. Eva didn't answer right away. Then she looked at me and said, because men like him never keep all their selves in one house. The storage facility sat behind a tire shop off the highway. Cold metal doors, security cameras, fluorescent office light. Caleb had always paid cash for emergency repairs, so the manager barely looked at us when Ava smiled and said her husband was in the hospital and she needed to check on some family things. He let us in with a temporary code after she cried in front of him. Inside Unit 214 were boxes. Dozens of them. Not furniture. Not tools, files. Labeled bins, old phones, a printer, blank forms, a stacks of envelopes, a small safe. A laminator. I remember that stupid laminator because it was the moment I understood this wasn't chaos. It was a system. I didn't know what was coming next, and honestly, I'm glad I didn't. The first box I opened held women's jewelry. Not cheap costume stuff. Engagement rings, necklaces, watches, each one in a labeled plastic bag with dates. Another box held folders with women's names written across the tabs. Tanya, Melissa, Brooke, Sandra, Ava, Nora. I could barely breathe. Eva pulled out a folder and flipped it open. Copies of IDs, utility bills, printed text conversations, social security forms, insurance documents, some real, some fake, some altered. Caleb wasn't just cheating. He was collecting lives. Then she found a folder labeled closed. Inside was the name Melissa Hart. There was a photo clipped to the front. Caleb with a blonde woman standing in front of a house I didn't recognize, his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling. On the back, in Caleb's handwriting, were the words, "Sale complete. Transfer done." I looked up at Ava. Who is she? Eva's voice came out then. He told me Melissa was his cousin. My skin went cold. We opened the safe using Mateo's birthday. Caleb reused emotional details because he thought women would never compare them. Inside were passports, prepaid phones, 2 checkbooks from accounts I'd never heard of, and a flash drive taped to the bottom with black electrical tape. When I plugged it into my laptop that night, my hands were shaking so hard Eva had to take over. The drive contained scanned deeds, forged marriage licenses, fake notarization stamps, and voice memos. Hours of them. Caleb talking to someone named Brent about signatures, closing timelines, debt cycles, and keeping the women separated. He sounded bored, professional, almost cheerful. In one recording, Brent asked, "What about the one on Maple?" Caleb laughed. "Nora? She won't do anything. Girls who grow up begging not to be left will swallow a lot if you hug them after." That sentence did something to me that all the affair evidence hadn't. He had studied my hunger. He had used my childhood like a key. But that still wasn't the biggest twist. Buried in the drive was a scanned document called POA 40 Power of Attorney, my name. Forged signature. Notarized by someone named Brent Ellis. It gave Caleb temporary authority to sell or transfer my property. Attached to it was an email chain with a closing date set for the following Friday. My house was 6 days away from being sold. I think I stopped breathing for a full second. Eva grabbed my arm. Nora. He was going to sell it, I said, but my voice didn't sound like mine anymore. He was going to sell Mrs. Bennett's house. And disappear, Eva whispered. There was more. An application for a passport under the name Daniel Cross. Flight information to Belize. A note that said final transfer after closing, plus insurance cash out. Underneath it, in Caleb's handwriting again, Eva settled. Nora unstable. Clean break, unstable. That word sat in my chest like poison. Suddenly, every argument made sense. Every time he'd calmly asked if I was spiraling, every time he'd texted after a fight, you seem emotional. Maybe rest before you respond. Every time he encouraged me to see a doctor for anxiety, then offered to keep track of my pills. He wasn't calming me. He was building a file. And then Ava made a sound I will never forget. She had been digging through another folder. Now she stood frozen, one hand over her mouth, the other clutching a pharmacy bag. Inside were prescription bottles with my name on them. Anti-anxiety medication I had never been prescribed. Sleeping pills, too. Filled months earlier. I stared at them. What is that? Eva's face had gone pale. He did this to me, she whispered. Last year. I kept blacking out. I thought it was stress. For the first time since the hospital, I wasn't just betrayed, I was afraid. We took everything to a legal aid office the next morning. A woman named Dana Cho met us in a tiny room with bad coffee and stacked binders. She looked through the files without interrupting once, which somehow made it feel more serious. When she finally looked up, her face was hard. This is fraud, she said. Likely multiple counts. Forgery, identity theft, possibly real estate fraud. Possibly more. Can we stop the sale? I asked. If we move fast. She tapped the forged power of attorney. But paper evidence is good. A direct admission is better. I knew what that meant before she said it. We needed him to talk. I didn't want to go near him again. I didn't want to hear his voice. I didn't want him in my house or my yard or my air. But fear has a strange way of turning into clarity when there's nothing left to save except yourself. Dana connected us to Detective Ramirez from Financial Crimes. He was cautious, which frustrated me at first, but he was honest. Men like this survive because victims feel shame, he said. You have nothing to be ashamed of. But if he's as practiced as he looks, he won't confess unless he thinks he's safe. So we built him safety. For 2 days, I answered Caleb's texts like a woman sliding back into denial. I'm confused. I need to talk. Maybe we can fix this. Every message made my skin crawl, but he responded exactly the way Dana expected. First, soft, then guilty, then tender, then irritated, then controlling. He asked where the papers were, asked if I'd been talking to Eva, asked if I was stable enough to handle this privately. At one point he wrote, "You know I love you, right? I've always protected you from hard things." I stared at that message for a full minute before replying. Maybe I don't understand everything yet. He took the bait instantly. But I still didn't know how ugly it was going to get. That night he showed up at the house without warning. No crutches, no apology, just that infuriating confidence of a man who has won by talking his way out of consequences before. I hadn't planned for him to come early, and for a second I panicked. Then I remembered Dana's words. Let him believe the old version of you is still here. So I opened the door. He walked in like he still belonged there. You stopped answering for 2 hours, he said, scanning the room. Why? I folded my arms. I was at work. He smiled tightly. No, you quit that job last month, remember? You said you wanted to focus on us. I had forgotten he made me cut my hours. Not because we needed it. Because he said the stress made me distant. I felt anger rise so suddenly it almost helped me. I'm trying to understand, I said. Then stop talking to Eva. There was no denial in his voice this time. No softness. Just instruction. What if she's telling the truth? He stepped closer. Nora, listen to me. That woman is unstable. She gets dramatic when she feels threatened. I almost laughed. The arrogance of it. He was using the same script on both of us and still thought we'd never compare pages. Then his eyes landed on the counter, on the envelope where I had deliberately left a copy of the loan paperwork half visible. Something in him sharpened. "Where did you get that?" I shrugged. "Our files." He moved so quickly I flinched. 1 second he was by the doorway. The next, he was right in front of me with his hand flat on the counter beside mine, not touching me. Just close enough to remind me he could. "You need to stop digging," he said softly. Softly. That's how men like him threaten. Quiet enough so they can deny it later. "What if I don't?" He smiled. That smile still visits me in bad dreams. "Then I'll do what I should have done months ago and let people see how bad your anxiety has gotten. I have texts, meds, episodes, everything. You think anyone will believe you over paperwork and a concerned husband?" He said husband. The fake word made me colder than the threat itself. "And if I tell them about Eva?" He leaned closer. "Then you both lose. She's already buried in debt, and I can make sure Mateo's school hears exactly what kind of mother she is. You'll lose the house anyway, maybe even faster." Then he straightened, looked around my kitchen and said, "Get some sleep. You're spiraling." After he left, I locked the door and vomited in the sink. I didn't know what was coming next. I only knew we had run out of time. The second major twist came from someone I had never met. Detective Ramirez called the next morning and asked if I could come in. There was a woman waiting in the interview room, maybe in her early 40s, with tired eyes and a scar near her chin. Her name was Melissa Hart. Not dead, not gone, alive. For a full second I just stared at her, because I had already built a tragedy around her in my head. "I saw my name in those files?" she asked. I nodded. Melissa gave a humorless laugh. "He does that. Keeps souvenirs." She had met Caleb 7 years earlier, before Eva, before me. He had moved in fast, taken control of her late father's rental property business, forged sales, drained accounts, and tried to convince her family she was abusing prescription drugs when she started asking questions. She had gotten out only because her sister installed cameras after Melissa kept waking up confused and sick. Caleb disappeared before he could be charged, changed states, changed details, and started over. Then she said the line that made the room go silent. "He doesn't just steal money," Melissa said. "He steals credibility first. That way by the time you scream, nobody trusts the sound." I felt that sentence in my bones. Melissa had one more thing. She handed Detective Ramirez a flash drive. "I kept a backup," she said. "He didn't know." On that drive was a recording from years earlier. Caleb, angry, careless, drunk enough to brag. He talked about testing women, seeing how much isolation and confusion they could handle before they broke. He talked about forged meds, fake concern, staged interventions. At one point he laughed and said, "If a woman thinks she's hard to love, she'll work twice as hard to keep you." I wanted to tear the room apart, but Melissa also gave us what we needed, a pattern. Intent. Method. A history he could no longer frame as misunderstanding or marital drama. And then, everything started moving fast. The emergency motion stopped the house sale for 48 hours. Only 48. Dana needed something stronger to freeze everything longer. Detective Ramirez wanted a live admission tying Caleb directly to the forged power of attorney and the drug setup. Melissa warned us he'd confess only if he thought he was still superior, still in control, still talking to a woman he believed was ashamed enough to protect him. So, we made a plan that terrified me. I texted Caleb and told him I was ready to sign whatever he needed if he would just explain everything face to face and promise not to destroy Eva. I told him I was tired. I told him maybe he had been right about me panicking. Even typing those words made my chest burn. He replied within a minute. "That's my girl. I'll come by tonight. We'll fix this. That's my girl." I looked at the screen until the letters blurred. For years, I thought those words meant belonging. Now I heard the leash in them. But that wasn't the final wound. An hour before he arrived, Eva called me crying so hard I could barely understand her. Mateo had asked why Daddy didn't come home anymore. She had tried to tell him Caleb was working, but he had stomped his foot and shouted, "He has another house! Children always know more than adults think." I drove to her place and found her on the floor of Mateo's room, surrounded by toy cars and little socks, breaking apart over the ordinary cruelty of it all. Not the fraud, not the forged papers. The child. The waiting. The way Caleb had let a 5-year-old love him only because it made the performance more believable. I sat beside her, and for the first time since we met, we cried together instead of alone. Then we wiped our faces, stood up, and finished getting ready to end him. When Caleb arrived at Maple Street that night, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Dana and Detective Ramirez were listening from a parked car down the block. Melissa was with Eva at Willow Lane, keeping Mateo distracted with pizza and cartoons. A small recording device sat inside the ceramic cookie jar on my kitchen counter. Another was clipped under my sweater. I had never been so scared in my life, but fear had changed shape by then. It no longer made me want to run, it made me want to survive. He walked in carrying flowers. Can you imagine that? Flowers. White lilies, the kind he brought after every fight, as if grief and apology were the same thing. "I thought we could start over," he said. I looked at the flowers and almost laughed. "You always bring those when you want me quiet." He paused. Just a flicker. "Nora." "No." "Explain." So he did. Or at least he thought he did. He started with the version designed to sound reasonable. He said he had gotten stuck between responsibilities, said Ava needed him because of Mateo, said I needed him because of my anxiety, said he never meant to hurt me, said he borrowed money for us, moved paperwork to protect assets, and kept things secret because women are emotional under stress. Then I put the forged power of attorney on the table. His jaw tightened. "Tell me what that is," I said. He looked at it for a long moment, then sat down slowly across from me. "Damage control?" he said. "For who?" "For all of us." I held his gaze. "Did you forge my signature?" He didn't answer. "Did you plan to sell this house?" Still nothing. "Did you fill prescriptions in my name?" That's when he smiled. Not warmly, not nervously, openly, proudly. And I finally met the real man I had married. "You want honesty?" he asked. "Fine. You were drowning before I met you. I gave you a life. I gave you structure. You think you kept that house standing by yourself? You think Eva could keep her kid fed without me? I do what needs to be done, and then both of you cry because you don't like how it looks on paper." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. "So yes," I said quietly. "You forged it." He spread his hands. "You would have signed eventually." "That's not what I asked." He leaned back in the chair, studying me like I was finally becoming interesting. "You really want to know?" "Yes, I signed it." "Because you're slow when it comes to hard choices. Because sentimentality is expensive. Because that house was dead money sitting under a woman who still sleeps with the hallway light on." The hallway light. I had never told anyone that except him. What I felt then wasn't pain anymore. It was release. The last thread of doubt snapped. I said, "And the pills?" He rolled his eyes. "You were never going to end up in a hospital, Nora. Relax." "They were leverage. Leverage? In case you got dramatic." He said it like discussing weather. "A couple photos, a concerned conversation, maybe an evaluation. Women calm down when custody, housing, and credibility are on the table." Custody. Housing. Credibility. He had turned human lives into buttons. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the fridge humming behind me. I could hear the faint scratch of his ring against the wood table as he tapped it. Then he said the cruelest thing of all. "You should be thanking me," he said. "Without me, you'd still be that lonely foster girl talking to dead people in a blue house." The front door opened before I even stood up. Eva walked in first. Caleb's face lost color so fast. It was almost beautiful. Behind her came Detective Ramirez and Dana. Caleb half rose from his chair, then froze when he saw the red light on the recorder Dana held up. For the first time, he looked small. "You set me up," he said. I looked him dead in the eyes. "No, I stopped protecting you." He tried anyway, of course he did. Said the conversation was taken out of context. Said I was vindictive. Said Ava was coercing him. Said Melissa, when she stepped in from the hallway a second later, was a liar with a personal grudge. Then Melissa lifted her chin and said, "You said almost the exact same thing to me 7 years ago." Caleb turned so slowly it looked mechanical. "Melissa?" Surprise. I will never forget that moment. Not because justice arrived with sirens or shouting, because the room he had spent years carefully dividing suddenly filled with every woman he had tried to isolate. Every version of us he thought would stay separate stood in the same house, breathing the same air, looking at him together, and he had nowhere left to hide. He lunged once. Not at me. At the paperwork on the table. Ramirez moved faster, pinned him against the wall, and read him his rights, while Caleb kept shouting that this was all a misunderstanding, that he loved us, that we were ruining innocent lives, that Mateo needed him, that I was mentally unstable, that Eva was dependent on him, that Melissa was obsessed. He kept talking as they cuffed him. That was the last trick. Noise, confusion, motion. He was still hoping one of us would collapse first. None of us did. After the door closed behind them, the house went so quiet it almost rang. My knees gave out before I could stop them. I slid down against the kitchen cabinet and started crying with the kind of deep, ugly relief that leaves your whole body shaking. Eva came down beside me. Melissa leaned against the counter and let out a long breath like she had been holding it for 7 years. Nobody said anything for a while. There are moments when language is too small for what just ended. The weeks after were messy in the least cinematic ways. Court filings, statements, bank calls, sleep I couldn't trust. Flashbacks triggered by stupid things like lilies in a grocery store, or the sound of a truck slowing outside the house. Caleb's lawyer tried to paint us all as bitter, unstable women with personal motives, just like Melissa predicted, but the evidence was too much. The forged documents, the recordings, the fake prescriptions, the prior complaints, Brent's financial trail, the passport, the sale attempt. One lie can look like confusion. A system looks like intent. The loan on my house was frozen, then voided. My deed was restored. Eva's debts were separated from the fraud accounts. Brent took a plea deal and handed over more records than Caleb probably believed existed. There were other women too. Not all of them wanted to testify. I understood that. Survival wears different faces. But justice, real justice, wasn't as neat as I once imagined. It wasn't one courtroom speech that healed me. It wasn't watching Caleb in handcuffs, though I won't lie and pretend that didn't matter. It was smaller, stranger. The first night I slept without the hallway light on. The first time I opened my own bank account and didn't apologize for asking questions. The first time I changed the locks and realized I wasn't scared of the sound of the drill. And then there was Mateo. Eva told him the truth slowly in child-sized pieces, not the fraud, not the marriages, just that some grown-ups pretend to be something they are not, and it is never a child's fault. One afternoon, a month after the arrest, she brought him over while we were repainting the kitchen. He sat on the floor with crayons and asked me if this was the other house. I said yes. He nodded very seriously and colored a blue square on his page. "This one feels nicer," he said. I almost cried into the paint tray. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive as wisdom, sometimes it arrives as a child noticing a room feels honest. Melissa started calling once a week. At first it was about paperwork. Then it became habit. Eva and I, against all odds, became part of each other's lives. Not because trauma bonds are romantic. They're not. But because surviving the same storm leaves a kind of recognition behind. She helped me plant tomatoes in Mrs. Bennett's old garden that spring. I helped her sort through bills and school forms and the practical wreckage Caleb had left behind. One evening, while we were sitting on my back steps watching the sun go down, she asked me, "Do you ever feel stupid?" I answered too fast. "Every day," she laughed sadly. "Me too." Then Melissa, who had come by with takeout, sat down on the grass and said, "Good. That means the shame hasn't finished leaving yet." We all laughed at that, real laughter, tired, cracked, but real. And that was the moment I knew we were going to be okay. Not perfect, not untouched. Okay. Months later, during the final hearing, Caleb looked at me only once, really looked. Not with charm, not with threat. Just confusion, almost. As if he still couldn't understand how the woman he categorized as lonely, grateful, and easy had become the one he couldn't move around anymore. I held his gaze until he looked away. That was the victory no paperwork could give me. Because the truth is, he did steal things from me. Time, trust. A version of innocence I will never get back. He stole the softness with which I once entered love. He stole the easy way I used to believe words that sounded tender. There are losses. Justice cannot return. But he did not get the ending. I kept the house. I kept Mrs. Bennett's note in the top drawer of my nightstand. I went back to full-time work and then, a year later, started a small evening support group at the community center for women dealing with financial abuse and coercive control. The first night, only 3 women came. The 5th week, there were 12. Nobody had to tell long stories if they didn't want to. Sometimes we just sat in a circle and practiced saying simple sentences out loud. I deserve access to my own money. Concern is not the same as control. Love does not require confusion. The first time I said that last one, my voice shook. Now it doesn't. Every now and then, someone asks me what exposed him in the end. They expect some dramatic answer. A detective, a hidden camera, a genius plan. But the truth is simpler, and maybe that's why it matters. He made one small mistake. He forgot which woman he had assigned which title. That was all. One name on a hospital screen. One address too many. One moment where the lie moved faster than the system holding it together. That tiny crack was enough, because lies like his do not fall apart from inside first. They fall apart when the people trapped inside them finally see each other clearly. If you ask me what I learned, it's this. The most dangerous kind of betrayal is not the one that breaks your heart. It's the one that trains you to distrust your own eyes, the kind that makes you explain away your fear, minimize your questions, and apologize for the shape of your pain. That kind of betrayal does not just want your love. It wants your voice. Take it back anyway. Take it back shaking. Take it back late. Take it back after the documents, after the lies, after the humiliation, after the night in the hospital hallway when the world splits in two and you realize the life you were defending never really existed. Take it back even if your hands tremble while you do it. Because the moment you stop protecting the person who is hurting you, you start returning to yourself. And if there is one thing I want anyone listening to this story to remember, it's this. People like Caleb survive by making sure their victims feel alone. That is their favorite weapon. Silence. Separation. Shame. The second those walls come down, they begin to shrink. He thought I'd never find out. He thought a lonely woman would stay grateful for crumbs if he called them love. He thought fear would keep me quiet. Paperwork would keep me trapped. And shame would keep me separate from the truth. He thought wrong. Because in the end, truth doesn't need a perfect plan. It only needs one small mistake, one open door, and one woman who finally decides to believe what she sees.